Hey folks, welcome back. So I was going to spend a little bit more time talking about the previous Star Trek RPGs before I got to more of the 2D20 stuff. But then I did that video about how to start playing Star Trek Adventures and I got excited, and so here we are. We're Starfleet, sometimes we have to break regulations, right? We'll get back to the Last Unicorn Games version especially at some point, because I want to talk about the Deep Space Nine game in that version. And I'll do an overview of the Decipher system as well, so the so-called Coda system. But for now, I want to talk about the core rulebook for Star Trek Adventures, which is mainly focused on a certain era in a kind of post-TNG timeline. And I'll briefly show the Game Master's Kit as well, which I think is a really good addition if you are going to play face-to-face. So without any further ado, we'll take a quick look at the lovely cover. Those of you who are following new releases will see that the Lower Decks campaign guide that's coming out in August basically makes a great reference to this sort of iconic cover image for the Core Rulebook in that campaign guide, so that's kind of cool. On the back, so you can create your own Star Trek stories of discovery and adventure. Complete 2D20 game system adapted for Star Trek Adventures. An extensive exploration of the United Federation of Planets and its galactic neighbors in the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma quadrants. Guidelines for game masters old and new on how to run an adventure of exploration and discovery for the crew of a Federation starship. A full catalog of aliens and antagonists, including Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, the Borg, and the Dominion. Brought to you by a team of expert Star Trek writers, including writers from previous editions of Star Trek role-playing games and other gaming talent. And personal logs and intercepted communications by Starfleet intelligence provide a new perspective on Star Trek and its events. And that is actually a really nice aspect of this book. There's all these kind of log messages scattered throughout the book, add a little bit of flavor to things. So you get a nice view of the galaxy. In the end papers, we have the big old Cardassian Union over here. We've got locations of tons of important star bases. We've got the Talarian Republic. We've got, basically everything you need to know about the galaxy is scattered through these maps here. You get a giant version of the galaxy map with the GM kit as well, so we'll look at that later. Won't spend too much time on that now. Now you can see the book is over 350 pages long. Actually over 360 pages long, and includes a starter mission, which I obviously will skip through as usual because I don't want to spoil it for you. But I'm going to try and keep this pretty quick. I just want to give you a flavor for the game, how it works. It's got some of my key favorite aspects in sci-fi games, which I'll explain as we go along, and it adapts everything to Star Trek really well. But the first thing to know out the gate is that unlike the kind of simulationist approach of Last Unicorn, where you're basically, your characters, your ships perform as if they were kind of real objects in a Star Trek-ified physics engine in a way. This is very much a narrative-based game system, so it's kind of like a Star Trek episode simulator rather than a Star Trek universe simulator, if that makes sense. And it does the job extremely well. If you want to have adventures that feel like episodes of a Star Trek TV show, this is the way to do it. I think they've done a fantastic job supporting the line as well. There's tons of stuff to talk about. I have basically every book except, as I mentioned, I refuse to buy anything related to Picard or Discovery. But I do have everything else pretty much, so we'll talk about those in turn. Throughout the book, you have these lovely little bits of flavor. So here we have a diagram of the Intrepid class. So this is the ship from Voyager, of course, pointing out where you have your phaser arrays, your thrusters, your nacelles, your landing gear, all that sort of stuff. And really, they mastered the Star Trek flavor of this book entirely. So we start off with Welcome to the 24th Century. So that's kind of the default era of the game, but you can of course adapt it to anything you want. So in the current game's timeline, it starts you off in 2371. So the USS Enterprise D is being sent on a mission to the Armagosa Observatory. The Voyager is about to be sent out on a mission into the Badlands to search for the Maquis. The USS Defiant has been assigned to Commander Sisko at Deep Space Nine to assist for searching in the Dominion. So basically, you're right at the cusp of loads of exciting things happening. So, you're about to have the Dominion War kicking off. You're about to have the adventures of the Enterprise D going to Armagosa. You're about to have Voyager running into the... what is the name of that thing? The Gatekeeper that shoots them off into the Delta Quadrant. And you can partake in any of those adventures, or, as it mentions here, other areas of gameplay are available. So you can play in TOS, as we saw in the Tricorder set, which is specialized for that. So you're not locked down to 2371, but if you want if you play as part of the organized play, or if you want to use the Shackleton expansion, which is wonderful, by the way, and run the kind of official campaign world, then you will be in that kind of time range. So basically, the key aspect here is they're introducing the concept of the game. So you're taking a position in Starfleet. That could be on a starship or a colony, and it's about developing a depth of character that fits with the feel of the show. And they make the case here that what makes Star Trek stories special isn't the tech and the photon torpedoes and everything, but it's about the characters and their beliefs, their motivations, and their roots in the ideals of the Federation, basically. So they want to create a game rich in tension and drama. Then they introduce you to what you will need. So you got to have your character sheet, which is surprisingly simple. I'll put a link in the description. They have a wonderful character creator app, which includes everything from every supplement. So you can make any character you want from that's so far available in the line. Guides you through the whole process. You will need to know kind of the basics of what you're doing, but I highly recommend using that. And it just prints out an official looking PDF with all the stuff you need on it, and just print that out and go play. But if you're playing face to face, you'll need to have some funky dice. So the multiple D20s, multiple action dice, and the GM will like to have probably the screen, paper and pencils, tokens, beads, or chips to track momentum and threat. And there you go. So they start out with a basic example of play. We've got loads of this sort of random numbers and diagrams that you would get in the LCARS kind of style, as on TNG, which I love. Again, some people are not super thrilled about the black background of this book, but I think it works really well in print. We have a nice view of Deep Space Nine here as well. A little bit of stellar cartography action. Now, the beginning of the book is all about the UFP, the Federation of Planets. So I won't go into the whole detail here because I assume that most of you, if you're caring enough about Star Trek to watch this video, then you'll have some idea about what's going on during this period in TNG history. One thing to remember is that most of the known galaxy that's covered in the shows is this tiny bit here. So you got the Klingon Empire, you got the United Federation of Planets, and the Romulan Star Empire. You got the Ferengi Alliance, you got the Breens, you got the Tsenkethi, you got the Cardassians, the Tholians, and the Talarians, and the Gorn. But it's really just one chunk of the galaxy. There's a lot of other parts that are unexplored, and you can see it's divided here into the 4 quadrants. So the main antagonists and protagonists of the show are in the alpha and beta quadrants, with the exception of Deep Space Nine, where we have the wormhole that goes to the gamma quadrant and pops out over here. Delta quadrant is, of course, where Voyager ends up, and they find, Union System 1 and the Borg and all that kind of cool stuff. So they talk about each of these different empires in turn, introduce them to you, but, probably not news for most players out there, including the Orion syndicates, the mysterious Tholians, and then what's going on in the Beta Quadrant, particularly the Klingon Empire, which is an ally of the Federation, although, as they mentioned, it's never been what you might call a stable alliance. And again, we have an example of what they touted in the back. So here we have a message from Admiral Chelik's primary overseer of Syndicate Operations, Shackleton Expanse. So he's a member of the Orion Syndicate talking about what's going on in the Shackleton Expanse. We have here a Tal Shiar internal communique. So Tal Shiar are the Romulan intelligence service, notorious for their ability to infiltrate and sabotage. So it's not just Federation logs that we get in here. There's loads of cool stuff. Quite a bit about the Romulans. We've had a lot of history with them, of course, in the show over the years. A bit about the Borg and the Dominion, of course, which led to the war arc in DS9. And of course, they also mentioned the Terran Empire, which is interesting. So I do hope that they get to a Mirror Universe supplement at some point. It's suggested by that inclusion. So then there's a little bit about the early history of the UFP. So again, we have various different kind of intercepted communications, personal logs. We have the launch of the Enterprise NX-01, which is of course the series Enterprise. We have a lovely TOS type image down here with those bright colors we used to love from their fake computer screens. We have a report from Vulcan physicians on the planet Earth in early 2153. All of this kind of background is set up using little sort of sidebars and personal communiques and stuff. It's a really cool way of, talking about what happened during the early period of the Federation. If you're not kind of used to Star Trek, it's going to be a little bit weird because you kind of jump from, the Romulan several ties, and then we talk about the neutral zone, and that kind of connects. But then we get into a whole thing about what the Tal Shiar are doing. So, they do assume a certain degree of familiarity, but I think that's fair enough. Then we've got the Andorian ambassador talking. We've got various captains, Klingon High Council, recommending further expansion efforts along the Romulan border and along the galactic rim headed away from Federation space, which offer many more opportunities for glory with less interference from godlike interlopers. So there you go. And here we have a lovely diagram of the original series Enterprise, the Constitution class. So we get an upper view, a profile view, front view, and a lovely cutaway here. We see the bridge, the sensor dome, impulse engines, all the various decks and stuff. Again, just bringing that Star Trek flavor on every damn page in this book, which is fantastic. We even have a log from Captain James T. Kirk. How about that? Yeah, we have various admirals speaking up about things. We've got the Daystream Institute opening. And then we get to the 23rd century. So this is the Kirk era. So we can see here armed with a classic style phaser and communicator in his gold command tunic. Of course, we changed all those colors around in TNG just to confuse everybody, but, why not? So here we talk about what happened in the TOS era, key conflicts with the Romulans, with the Klingons, the exploration of the galaxy from the Federation, and then some tips about role-playing in the 23rd century. So there was exciting adventures in exotic locales, the galaxy was less familiar, they often encountered things you'd never seen before, and there was also less politics and more on immediate relations between the crew. So, of course, there was politics in TOS, and they did promote, diversity and all this great stuff in the show. But the Federation was substantially smaller than it was in the TNG era. Warp was slower and used a different scale. So basically, it's kind of more of a Wild West feel and that was the intention. I mean, famously, Gene Roddenberry called TOS. He wanted it to feel like Wagon Train to the Stars. So now we get into recent Federation history. So this is all about the Kidomir Accords, for example, where we start to make peace with the Klingons. We have executive summaries, intelligence summary of the Romulan Imperial Fleet. We have a little bit from the Ferengi even there. May the divine treasury smile upon our new opportunity. So they want to exploit the human territory for business opportunities. Yeah, so again, the storytelling is coming through these logs, and it's a very unique way of presenting what is happening. So we also have, for example, a tactical analysis of a Borg cube, lots of meaningless numbers and Elkar's interface stuff, but you can see that, it's big and scary. And then we have a report of the Battle of Wolf 359 from the Borg perspective. So we got a resistance, 40 vessels of varying size and configuration, 39 vessels destroyed, 11,213 beings eliminated and unavailable for assimilation. Damage to cube minimal. One vessel neutralized and left for eventual assimilation following completion of primary objective. Currently entering Sol System for completion of primary objective. Unit Locutus has been removed from cube. Removal is futile and shall not affect directive outcome. Ooh, there you go. Yeah, so again, we've got more intercepted messages. We've got somebody from a Pakled. They were always kind of the comedy idiots of the Starfleet world, as you can see in the Lower Decks show as well. So yeah, and now we get into your continuing mission. So this is all about the purpose of Starfleet and what you will encounter and what you'll need to do as a Starfleet officer. So the purpose of Starfleet is to be kind of a complicated multi-role, sort of military, sort of not. I mean, they're responsible for defense, but they're also responsible for science and exploratory missions. There's a debate in the community, of course, about whether they're really military or not, because they obviously have a ranking system, they have a training academy, they have officers and enlisted people. I mean, there's clearly military aspects to it, but also they're responsible for spreading further the boundary of human knowledge. So it's not your standard military role. There's a whole section here about the Prime Directive, so that's General Order 1. Basically, that means that we're not supposed to interfere with civilizations that are still developing, that haven't discovered warp as of yet. We can observe them and see if they think they might be good Federation members later, but they must be entirely left alone, and extra care must be taken to not make them aware that there is a galactic Federation or any other craziness going on. So, of course, there's lots of ways that can come into play during a number of different scenarios, and they play with that in some of the official scenarios as well. And we have some personal thoughts on the Prime Directive from certain people. So as the first step into Starfleet, you go to Starfleet Academy. So there's a discussion here about the emotional cost of exploration, why people choose to join Starfleet, their mission to foster lifelong learning through exploration, the benefits of making connections during your academic time, and the tremendous power and impact of the feeling of graduation and being a part of promotion into Starfleet. Then they talk about the department colors and your assignment as an officer in Starfleet. So there are 3 colors: gold, blue, and red. So basically, in the 2260s through the 2270s, the command wore gold, sciences wore blue, and operations wore red. That was the TOS era. Given the high mortality rate among red shirts, the operation branch acquired a stigma within the service, and in the mid-24th century, Starfleet Command altered uniform colors and some organization within the command division. Command and operations switched to uniform colors, and positions of navigator and helmsman were moved from command to operations. So, nice little link to, of course, everybody knows that if you beam down on a away team in a red shirt in TOS, you are in big, big trouble. And that actually, they use that as an explanation for the change of uniform colors. So, once you get your duty assignment, they use this kind of section as a way to start exploring how you might set up your mission, your way of playing the game. So it says here, your ongoing mission, this section has examples of directives to employ in your game. They can span multiple Star Trek missions. They could be, in general, to seek out new life, explore strange new worlds, or it could be more specific, such as catalog the stellar bodies of the Shackleton Expanse, or discover the origin of the strange readings from TRAPPIST-06. A good place to start would be the starship's duty role, such as defense, diplomacy, exploration, or relief, to establish a key directive. If any more come to mind that are a little more specific, add them too. And then we have a specific list of mission types. So you'd have different types of science missions, deep space exploration, planetary exploration and survey, R&D, stellar phenomena. Then we have diplomatic missions like resolving conflicts, brokering peace, diplomacy, first contact, which is always sensitive, protection and security. So basically, they mention the fact that, effectively, even in the 23rd century, the Enterprise could lay waste to a whole planet. And by the 24th century, a starship's capability to destroy is more than all the armies of Earth's history combined. So it's a huge amount of responsibility that comes with that. If you're in a protection and security duty, then you might be as part of an aid and relief team. You could be on patrol, maybe on the neutral zone, or along the Cardassian border, looking out for the Borg, checking out the terrorist activities of the Maquis, all that kind of stuff. You might also be at a Starfleet installation, like Starbase, Science Station, Colony, etc., which can be very remote, or they could be quite close to the center of key Starfleet operations, or you could be part of a tactical response team. So this is where, you detect active stuff going on. A hostile probe enters Federation space, the Borg assimilate an outpost, etc., etc. So then they talk about the mission of the away teams. So away teams are staffed by diverse and skilled members of your crew, and they're key to accomplishing the mission of the United Federation of Planets. So when you take your crew on away missions, they will be in harm's way. I make a point to mention that. And there could be different types of harm, right? It doesn't have to be just physical harm. It could be that you make irreparable damage to an important diplomatic mission, you screw up first contact and lead to a war. I mean, lots of bad things could happen from a badly constructed or poorly performing away team. So they put diplomatic missions up front here, which I think is good. And relief missions as well. So this is where if there's a world affected by a plague, you deliver relief, try to find a cure, all that kind of stuff. Exploration and scientific missions as well. Here we have an away team seemingly in quite a bit of trouble. We've got some sort of half out of phase organism. We've got a building collapsing. We've got explosions happening. We've got a glowing artifact thingy. And there's an explosion ripping through a moon. Pretty unnervingly close by. So seems like an exciting session to me. And here we have a lovely diagram of the Danube class runabout. A little bit more about planetary survey operations. Now we have peacekeeping and military operations. So teams under this kind of mission will be led by tacticians. They should be skilled in investigation, security, and conflict, basically, if you're investigating crimes or trying to keep the peace somewhere. And they're also covert operations, so that's Starfleet intelligence kind of stuff. Real hush-hush-like. Here we have a lovely diagram of the USS Enterprise D, the Galaxy class, with its bulging ovoid saucer here. Very classic and recognizable. So now we get into operations. So this is kind of how to play the game, basically. So we have the typical, what's a role-playing game, the game master's role, and then we start to talk about more specific stuff, namely that dice are primarily used for resolving tasks. Tasks are like what you would call a challenge or a test in some other systems. So basically, 2 or more D20s will be required. 2 D20 is usually the default, but you can buy more dice with momentum and stuff like that, as we explained in the John Carter of Mars background videos I did before. We have an additional type of dice for Star Trek, which are these conflict dice here. You can see they have some kind of explosion symbols and they have some Federation symbols. Basically, they are used for inflicting damage and determining how much protection a character receives from cover. So each Federation symbol, or each challenge dice rather, has 4 faces. So a score of 1, a score of 2, and 2 faces showing the Starfleet arrowhead, which is an effect. So effects have a score of 1 and additionally trigger special outcomes, which will depend on the circumstances, such as the weapon that you're using. They also give you a conversion table, so if you don't want to buy challenge dice, you can just use regular D6s. And basically 1 and 2 are 1 and 2, 3 and 4 don't count for anything, 5 and 6 are 1 plus effect. So it's not a difficult translation to make. A little sidebar about rerolls, and just clarify how they're used in gameplay. So now we have basic operations. So this is a basic idea of how the show works. So again, we're more like doing a TV show simulator here. So we divide a typical adventure into scenes, and those are then structured into and divided into encounters. And the game master will set the situation, and there may be traits imposed on the environment. So, for example, there could be a situation trait that is inherently temporary, so lasting just for the current scene. So that might be, for example, it's darkness right now. You can't see very well. But if you fix the lights on the dead space station or whatever, you can fix that. these kind of traits are not necessarily permanent, and the players can affect them. You can have a location trait and it's permanent. So, if you're on a lava planet, it's really hot and there's nothing you can do about it. A personal trait is one that applies to a character or creature. It could be a permanent, could be part of their innate abilities, or it could be something fleeting like a mood or an emotion. So maybe you have a Klingon, but he's super pissed off, and that makes him harder to fight with. Or you could have, a Vulcan who's just always going to be logical. You can have equipment traits as well that describes a piece of equipment. So as long as the item is functional, it represents the trait. And the difference with this is that this is a trait you can pass to other people. So traits exist for as long as they remain useful in the scene, and as long as they remain true. So basically, they help the game master determine what is and isn't possible. So, if you're in total darkness on a space station, you don't have any source of light, it'll be impossible for you to shoot effectively. Or if somebody comes and starts stalking you, or it'll be difficult for you to track somebody, for example. The trait could be beneficial. So it could reduce the difficulty for something that would normally be impossible or very difficult. Or it could be detrimental. So it prevents an activity from being performed entirely, or it increases the difficulty in some way. A lot of people don't use traits as much as they should in this game. I think they did a better job in Dune, in that rulebook, of really emphasizing that traits are really powerful because they last for a whole scene potentially, or even longer. And there are ways that you can create positive traits. There's also advantages. So those are traits which are inherently positive or beneficial and will never have a detrimental effect on their owners. They can make an activity possible that wasn't possible before, reduce the difficulty of a task, or cancel out a complication. And complication is a trait which is inherently negative or problematic, which is never beneficial. And they can prevent a character from accomplishing something, make a task harder, cancel out an advantage, etc., etc. There are various ways that players can produce both advantages and complications. So that's a key part of the system here. So then we get into the basics of how tasks work. So this is just basically when you need to achieve something and the success is in doubt because you're under pressure, or there's a possibility for a failure or for complications that could happen that could be interesting. If they're doing something routine like going to the replicator, getting a cup of Earl Grey tea, don't roll. But if you're fixing the warp engines to try and get more power during a battle, that's definitely something you need to roll for, because you might screw things up, you might be spectacularly successful, or you might fail and cause the engines to shut down or lose power. So in those cases, you'll need to use the task mechanism. So each character has 6 attributes: control, daring, fitness, insight, presence, and reason, which encompass their innate capabilities, and they range from 7 to 12. And then each character has 6 disciplines: command, con, which is piloting basically, engineering, security, science, and medicine, which cover the character's training, and they range from 1 to 5. The player also has focuses, which are categories of specialty. They don't have a specific rating of their own, but they're attached to your disciplines. So for any given task, a character will combine a single attribute, a single discipline, and may use a single focus to establish the target number. So again, we're doing like we did in John Carter. We're taking the 2 different types of statistics that define a character, we're combining them to get a target number, and then we're rolling 2 or more d6s to determine success. If you roll under that target number, that's 1 success. If you roll a 1, that's 2 successes. And then, there's a whole kind of sort of itemized list here. You can purchase up to 3 additional d20s by spending momentum. You can purchase d20s by adding to the GM's threat pool, or you can use determination as well. And once you've chosen the number of dice you're going to roll, then you roll and you count up your successes. If you roll a natural 20, that causes a complication, which is bad news, basically. But if you have an advantage in that category, you might be able to cancel it out, for example. So they give an example here. So Scotty is trying to squeeze additional power out of the Enterprise's engines. His target number is his control attribute, 11, and engineering discipline, 4, for a target of 15, and he has a focus in starship propulsion, and the task has a difficulty of 2. So that means he needs 2 successes to pass. He rolls 2 d20s, rolling a 4 and a 19. The 4 scores 2 successes because it was underneath his focus, which is in engineering discipline, which was 4. So since he rolled a 4 under, which was equal to his focus in engineering discipline, that means that success counts as 2. So with 2 successes, he just passes the task and is able to squeeze more power out of the engines. Then they give idea of how to judge difficulties. So they give, an example of how different characteristics of the scene can affect the difficulty. So Dr. McCoy is attempting to perform complex heart surgery on Ambassador Sarek. That has basic difficulty of 2, but there are other factors. Firstly, Sarek is Vulcan. McCoy's knowledge of Vulcan physiology is limited, which increases the difficulty by 1. Secondly, without a Vulcan blood donor, the operation can't be performed at all. This complication is overcome by having Spock donate blood. Thirdly, the Enterprise is under attack, which is obviously disruptive, increasing the difficulty by 1. Together, these increase the difficulty to 4. Fortunately, McCoy has the Enterprise sickbay and Nurse Chapel to assist him. And that is really key. Having assistance from your ship resources and from other people, it can really make the difference in succeeding at difficult tasks. They also mention, as in John Carter, sometimes difficulty 0 tasks are still worth rolling for because there's a chance of generating a complication, but you can generate more momentum, basically. So, as an example, Lieutenant Paris is piloting the USS Voyager, maneuvering around a board cube. There's no real chance of failure, so the difficulty is 0. However, it's still valuable to see how well he succeeds, so Paris still rolls for the task, generating momentum that can be used to benefit himself and the crew. So, again, basic 2D20 system stuff, but we have the addition of the focus, and if you have focus in a discipline and it applies to the situation, then rolling under that focus as well as under the target number will generate an extra success for you. Then we talk about opposed tasks. So there are different outcomes. Basically, if you're doing an opposed task, both characters attempt the task normally with a base difficulty of 1, which may be adjusted by circumstances. Each character may have different difficulties depending on their capabilities, basically. If the active character succeeds and the reactive character fails, the active character achieves their goal. If the active character fails and the reactive character succeeds, the active character fails and the reactive character's task is resolved. If both characters fail, the active character fails to achieve their goal, but the reactive character gains no additional benefit. If both characters succeed, then you compare the total momentum generated by each roll. The character with the higher momentum wins, but loses 1 momentum for each momentum their opponent scored. The loser then loses all the momentum they generated and may not spend any. And then you give an example of Worf locked in hand-to-hand combat with a Jem'Hadar, and how this is an opposed task with difficulty of 1 for each. Worf has daring 12 and security 5 for a target number of 17, which is very, very good. And he's using his focus in Makbara, Klingon martial arts. Jem'Hadar has daring 11 and security 3. Worf rolls an 8 and a 12, scoring 2 successes, enough to generate 1 momentum. Jem'Hadar rolls a 6 and a 15, scoring only 1 success and no momentum. After a few moments of struggle, Worf forces his way past the Jem'Hadar warrior's defenses and brings down his foe. There you go. Then we get into complications. So each d20 that rolls a 20 creates a complication, which comes into play once the task has resolved. So as described, complications are basically traits, facts about the scene that are inherently negative. So if the character doesn't want to suffer that complication, then the complication can be bought off by adding 2 points to the threat pool. But then the threat pool, as in John Carter, can be used by the GM to add danger to your current situation anyway. So it's a bit of a robbing Peter to pay Paul situation, but if you really need that task to succeed without a complication, it can be very much worth it. So the complication range, so it says some circumstances can make a task uncertain, though not necessarily any more difficult. So that means that the GM also has the option of, instead of increasing the difficulty, you increase the complication range. So there's more chances for that whatever activity you're doing, whatever task you're doing, to go horribly wrong than otherwise. You can also have success at a cost. So you can say either before the dice is rolled, or the GM might give you the option after the dice have been rolled. Then basically the failed task will still be successful, but you'll have an automatic complication in addition to any that come up by a natural 20 roll. And those complications will function the same as normal ones, so you can buy them off with momentum, trade them for 2 points of threat, or use them in other ways depending on what the specific task was and your character's abilities. Then we talk about momentum, so how to spend momentum to improve the outcome of a successful task, such as gaining more info from research, inflicting more damage, making more progress with a problem, etc. So momentum can be spent to improve the outcome after the GM describes it, and you don't have to declare it in advance. So, for example, you can see how much damage you did to an opponent before you say, I want to spend momentum and inflict a bit more just to take them down. Most uses for momentum can be used only once on a given task or once on any given round in combat. Except for some are noted as repeatable, which means it can be used as frequently as you want, as long as you have momentum to spend. You can save momentum, which goes into a group pool. So, if you generate momentum on your task, it goes into a pool that can benefit the other characters in the party as well. And any member of the group may spend momentum from that group pool, including any that they generated from the current task as well. So you can also use, of course, threat spends along with momentum spends. So generating a single point of threat for the GM provides the same benefit as spending a single point of momentum. So there you go. Then we have non-player characters, so those controlled by the GM. So instead of them having a pool of momentum to use, basically each time they generate momentum, or they would do, if they were a player character, they add a single point to the threat pool. And that's pretty standard for the 2d20 system. So common uses for momentum, you can create an advantage. So spending 2 momentum will allow you to add an advantage, or to remove a complication, or to create a complication for an adversary, which is interesting. You can create an opportunity, so that means you're adding bonus d20s to a task. So the cost of this increases for each die purchased. The first die costs 1 momentum, the second one costs 2, the third die costs 3, and you can never buy more than 3 because you can never have more than 6 momentum in total anyway. You can create a problem, so you can choose to make things more difficult for an opponent, increasing the difficulty of a single task by 1 for every 2 momentum spent. The decision to increase the difficulty must be made before the dice are rolled, however, by the opponent. You can use it to get more information. So each point you spend, you can ask the GM a single question about the situation or an item or a location, and they have to then answer some question. It has to be truthful, but it doesn't have to be complete. It could be a partial or brief answer. So threat is also an integral part. In Game Master terms, the GM gains threat in a few different ways, which we've already gone over, basically. So you can pay for bonus d20s with threat instead of momentum at the same cost rate. You can spend threat to eliminate complications, by adding 2 to the threat pool. If you're in a threatening circumstance, like you're having a fight on a lava planet and there's shit blowing up everywhere, the GM may think that's tough enough to warrant 1 or 2 threat to the pool automatically. Some NPCs may generate threat just for turning up because they're really scary and tough. And NPC characters can build up threat for the GM, as we mentioned before, by rolling enough successes to generate what would be momentum if they were a PC. So the Game Master can spend threat in a few common ways. So an NPC can use threat in all the ways that player characters can. So, okay, they can, for example, eliminate complications by spending 2 threat. The Game Master can create a complication by spending 2 threat. You can bring in reinforcements as well. So minor NPCs cost 1 threat apiece, while notable NPCs cost 2. Starship reinforcements cost threat equal to their scale. So that can be a lot of threat. But you'll find during a typical game, sometimes GMs are sitting on big pools of threat. So you have to watch out for like suddenly a giant Romulan warbird decloaks or something if they have like 12 threat. They can also trigger or cause problems with the environment by spending threat. Player characters begin each session with a single point of determination. You never have more than 3 points at a time of determination. And the way these are determined is by basically they're tied to a character's values. So each character you generate has values that basically describe what they value most in their lives, in their, personal agendas. So a point of determination spent basically provides a few different things. You get a single bonus d20, but it's considered to have automatically rolled a 1. So you can just place it on the 1 face, and you've automatically got 2 successes from spending that point of determination. You can have a moment of inspiration, so you can just re-roll your entire dice pool for that point of determination. You can have a surge of activities, which means you can perform another task as soon as this one has been resolved. So if you're in combat and you need to take out 2 people, or it's going to be bad for you, maybe you want to use your determination for that. Or you can do Make It So. You immediately create an advantage that applies to the current scene. So basically, the idea is that your character's values will sometimes drive them to have that additional push to succeed because what's happening is particularly applicable to what they care about. So you can also challenge your values. So if your value is not helping or is hindering the character, then that puts you in a situation where your values are tested and maybe could even change your worldview. That could mean the character realizes something about themselves or realizes something important that they, by learning from someone else. So once during a mission, if a character has a value that could affect a task negatively, they can choose to challenge it. They gain a point of determination and cross out the current value on their character sheet, meaning they can't use it for the rest of the mission. So then at the end of the mission, you will alter the value to reflect the challenge to the character's beliefs and replace it with something that represents some new aspect of your character. So it's a really cool aspect of character development. I mean, one of the things about Star Trek games is that, characters don't develop in the same way that they do in other games. You don't have levels and stuff so much, and the same in other sci-fi games. You tend to be pretty much amazingly skilled right out of the box. And you will get better by being promoted. And in the Klingon book, you'll see there's great rules about building reputation and stuff that can be applied to the feds as well. But there's not an awful lot of character progression in the way you would expect in a typical RPG. It's more about, learning about yourself and exploring your values and your determination. So now we get into the advanced rules. This is getting into stuff like extended tasks where you have multiple challenges. You could have time challenges. I'm not going to get into detail of these because it would be complicated to explain, and it's all explained reasonably well here. I think they could spend more time on these because if you go to the forums and stuff, there's loads of questions about extended tasks, but they're explained better elsewhere. There are certainly FAQs and great videos that really can explain it for you. And now we get into character creation. So this is about how you start your career in Starfleet. So the primary focus of the game is the main characters. So they're the ones that appear in most episodes. Each player in a game will have a single main character control who will be a member of the senior staff of usually a starship, but it could be a starbase as well. But they also have this great idea of supporting characters, so you can kind of generate them as needed. And so, for example, if you're setting down an away mission, and there's, it would make sense for the tactical officer to go down to deal with the situation because it's too minor for them, you can generate a supporting character and send them out, and it could be one of the other PCs goes with them. But it basically allows for that added sense of like we're part of a big starship or starbase with lots of highly trained people available at any given time. NPCs are those characters that are not controlled by the players at all. So those are typically threats. They could be friendly characters, and they might help out, during different situations or combat, but they are important enough to be controlled in full by the GM. Character will typically have one or more traits, which will be part of the character's species description. So it's an important part of the character described in a single word or phrase. Then you have the values, which cover the character's personality, beliefs, and motivations. So those, along with traits, determine what the character is, what they can do. So then we go through there's a little nice sidebar about playstyle as well. Basically talking about how they're trying to mirror the format of the TV shows more than simulate the universe of Star Trek, where as a real place, kind of. Then we get more details about values, about the attributes and what they're used for. So, this really is helpful information when you're trying to choose how to set up your dice pool for a given task, because you need to combine one of your attributes and one of your disciplines for every role and work out which ones are best. So they talk about what to use control for: daring, fitness, insight, presence, and reason. And then we get into the discipline, and they're rated from 0 to 5. So as you go through character creation, depending on the pathways you take, it's a life path system, basically like Traveler, where your character goes through different courses. They have an upbringing, they have a course through Starfleet, they have a certain amount of experience from previous work in Starfleet, and each sort of succession part of their life adds to their skills and their abilities. So it talks about the command disciplines, con, which is the ability to fly something, basically, both ground vehicles and shuttles and starships. It includes navigation. So here is nice because they give you an idea of how you would combine the specific discipline, like command, with any of the attributes. So it's a nice way to help you understand the types of roles, types of dice pools you would set up for different situations. So main characters will have six focuses, and they're encouraged to create their own focus. Each focus should be narrower than the 6 disciplines that every character has trained in, but they shouldn't be so narrow as to never come up in play. So for example, your character might be well trained in science, so you decide to give them a focus in astrophysics. So it'll be useful sometimes, but not all the time. You can't just have a focus in all science things. It's too broad. And they use some nice examples of like the level of specificity they're looking for. So you could be specialized in, transporters and replicators, trauma surgery, evasive action, hand-to-hand combat, that kind of stuff. So reasonably specific to a given situation. Talents are additional benefits that characters possess that give them a certain area of specialty. So they normally take the form of a bonus momentum, re-rolls, or whatever that applies when you're doing a certain type of task or approach to a situation. And most talents have one or more specific requirements. So now we get into the life path creation system. There's basically 7 steps. So first, you choose your species. The options in the rulebook are Andorian, Bajoran, Betazoid, Denobulan, Human, Tellarite, Trill, and Vulcan. And each of those will give you a trait, +1 to each of 3 attributes, access to some talents, and 1 unique talent. Step 2, you choose your character's environment. So that's where you were raised. And that environment will give you a value, +1 to 1 attribute, and +1 to 1 discipline. Step 3 is your upbringing. So that's the education you had as a child, basically. So that will be ending up with +2 to 1 attribute and +1 to a second. You'll have +1 to a single discipline, and you'll gain 1 focus and 1 talent. So now you're starting to get older. You're starting to understand yourself a bit more. I'm sorry if the focus is not so great at times. I think the camera is struggling with the kind of white on black here a little bit. So step 4 is when you go to Starfleet Academy and you choose which track you want to join: Command, Operation, or Sciences. So that'll give you 1 value, 3 points to spend on 2 or 3 attributes. +2 to a discipline and +2 to 2 other disciplines, or +1 to 2 other disciplines, 3 focuses and 1 more talent. Step 5 is how long your career has been so far. Are you young and experienced? Are you a veteran, or somewhere in between? Depending on what you choose, you'll gain a value and a talent. Finally, you choose some key career events. So that would gain you 2 points for attributes, 2 for disciplines, and 2 focuses. And finally, finishing touches. So you'll gain 1 value, +1 to 2 attributes, +1 to 2 disciplines. Adjust attributes and disciplines that go above the maximum scores, so bring those back down. And then you record your derived scores, which are things like stress, the amount of damage you can take, basically, bonus damage for attacks, things like that, plus character's name, rank, role, department, and starting equipment. So that's a lot to take in. Again, if you go through the book, and then you follow up by looking at the character creator and just experimenting with it, it'll really start to come together pretty quickly. They also give you some, random tables if you want to have a traveler experience of like randomly rolling up everything. They give you background on each of the main species introduced in the core book. So Andorians, they're available for all eras of play, and they have access to some talents, including Proud and Honorable, and the Ushan, so it's a form of honor dueling. The Bajorans, they're for the TNG area only, because we didn't know them before that. They gain some particular bonuses, and then they have particular access to 2 talents as well, Orb Experience. So you receive a vision from the prophets, which would give you certain benefits. Or you have a strong pah, so you have strong faith, and when you try to resist being coerced or threatened, you reduce the difficulty by 1. So you have a strong will. Betazoid, so that's TNG only as well. You gain insight, presence, and reason for that, and you gain the ability of varying amounts of telepathy, and you're highly perceptive of telepathic disturbances, mental assaults, and you're empathic as well. If you go down the empath section, then you can sense the emotions of most living beings nearby. You can communicate telepathically with other empaths and telepaths, as well as those with whom you're extremely close. You can choose not to do so, but it's an ability available to you at any time. If the situation is stressful, it might be harder to block out, stressful emotions from others around you. Or you could be a telepath, so you can sense the surface thoughts and emotions of most living beings, and so you can read the surface thoughts of characters. You could choose not to do that unless they're resistant to telepathy, in which case you just can't do it anyway. It will require a degree of effort and a task to pick out the emotions or thoughts of a specific individual in a crowd, to search a creature's mind for specific thoughts, or to block the minds of those out nearby. So mind powers are very useful in this game, I will say, especially on a narrative level, trying to determine what somebody is up to. Denobulans, they're from all eras of play. They're generous, inquisitive people who have been the allies of humanity since the 2130s. They have the talents of cultural flexibility, so you're at ease when meeting new cultures, and when you have a task relating to meeting an unfamiliar culture, you reduce difficulty by 1. You also have a large family, and you're used to being a parent figure, so when you're trying to coordinate even the most unruly and fractious of groups, and so basically when you're assisting, the first complication generated on the task by anyone attempting the task may be ignored, which is really handy. You can, of course, be a human. So your example value is a drive of exploration. You're flexible. So instead of the normal attribute options, choose 3 attributes and add +1 to each of them. You're resilient. That's your main trait. And you have access to the talent of resolute. So you increase your maximum strength by stress by 3. And you'd have the spirit of discovery. So you spend 1 more point of determination to add 3 group points to the group momentum pool, which is also very handy in a crisis. Tellarites, they're available in all areas as well. All eras, rather. They gain +1 control, +1 fitness, +1 insight. They have a keen sense of smell and a high tolerance for many common drugs, toxins, and inebriants. They have excellent eyesight and acute perception. So you can have the following talents of incisive scrutiny. You can spot weak spots in arguments, theories, and machines alike to glean information about them, learning about things by how they respond to pressure against vulnerable points. When you succeed at a task you control insight, you gain a bonus momentum. You're also sturdy, so you reduce the cost to resist being knocked prone by the knockdown damage effect by 1, and gain +1 resistance against all non-lethal attacks. Then we have the Trill, the symbionts. So they've lived many lifetimes. Example value is 4 lifetimes of adventure, in fact. They gain +1 control, +1 presence, +1 reason. So their Trill are particularly resistant to parasites, but they have strong allergic reactions to insect bites and other forms of venom, which can disrupt their neurochemistry. They can have 2 possible talents, a former initiate. So basically, you're one of those who failed to get a symbiont, but even to be a failed initiate, you have to be a really high quality person. So you still join the intention with Starfleet. If you are joined with a symbiont, then you have lifetimes of memories to draw upon, and you can declare once per mission that a former host had expertise in a relevant field. You gain a single focus for the remainder of that scene as you draw upon those memories. Additionally, you gain a trait with the name of the symbiont. This reflects potential advantages of the joining, the ability to perform rites and rituals to awaken past those memories, and the vulnerabilities inherent in the connection. It's pretty cool. Then we have Vulcans. Everybody loves Vulcans. They're always available. They're stable, stoic, rational people. Widely claimed to be emotionless. In truth, the Vulcans feel deeply and intensely to their own detriment. A Vulcan will achieve +1 control, +1 fitness, +1 reason, and their trait is Vulcan. So they're naturally resistant to extreme heat and dehydration. They're also extremely strong, and they have keen auditory and olfactory senses. They're also telepathic, but this takes training to properly manifest, and they need regular meditation to maintain that. They can take the talents of Kolinar, so you've undergone the ritual journey to purge all emotion. So the difficulty of all tasks to resist coercion, mind control, pain, etc. is reduced by 2, which is amazing. Or you can do mind meld. So you have training in telepathic techniques. So through physical contact, you can require a task with a difficulty of at least 1, which can be opposed by an unwilling participant. If successful, you link minds, sharing thoughts and memories. You can spend momentum to gain more information and perform deeper exchanges. The link goes both ways, and it's tiring and potentially hazardous for you. Complications can result in pain, disorientation, or lingering emotional or behavioral difficulties. Or you can do the nerve pinch, which is a swift and non-lethal way to incapacitate assailants. So it counts as a melee weapon with 1 damage die, size, 1 H, and the intense and non-lethal qualities. You may use science or medicine instead of security when attempting a nerve pinch attack. It may increase your damage by your science or medicine discipline instead of security. So there you go. You can also create unusual or unique characters. So if you want that super special snowflake that isn't covered in the core book, probably, honestly, you could find it in one of the supplements because they cover so much stuff. But, you could always make up somebody particularly special example of a certain species or a species that's not covered in the book through homebrew. If you want lots of really good quality homebrew, check out the Continuing Emissions blog, which is all about Star Trek Adventures content made by fans. So then we get into all the details of the different life paths, which we're going to skip through because it's just list after list of things. And then we get to the sample character sheet here. So as you go through, you get kind of an example of the life path generation. And at the end, you get an example of Jolatan, who's a Trill from an isolated colony. They're a science officer. They have an Aton symbiont. And they are lieutenant commanders, so they're pretty experienced. They got focuses in survival training, uniform code of justice, xenoanthropology, hand phasers, etc., etc. They're particularly good at control, presence, and reason with 10, 10, and 12, but their highest training is in science and medicine with 5, 3, and also 3 in command. They want to understand the purpose of life. They value seeking out new life and new civilizations. They've seen too much to be surprised, and living with your ideals is harder than dying for them. There you go. They have the talents of cautious, intense scrutiny, joined, and technical expertise, and they carry a phaser type 2 and standard equipment, i.e. a uniform, comm badge, and tricorder. So there you go. So this is just a quick sort of recap of how you can do character creation during play. Then we get into supporting characters, which are really handy. So you can use them for minor actions or incidental activities. An uncontrolled character cannot attempt a task with difficulty above 0, but they can assist player characters, but they can only do once per round in combat. They don't get a round separate to them during combat, basically. They get minor actions and tasks are resolved as part of the actions of player characters. They can be injured in combat and can suffer complications as normal. However, an uncontrolled character may not spend momentum or add to threat to avoid an injury. So they're basically a lot less sort of independent than a regular player character, which makes sense. But yeah, they're pretty easy to create during play, and you'll find themselves using them a lot. They're very useful for setting up certain types of scenes, for having the storyline of a mission make sense. You send out the right supporting characters with the right team to get the results that you want. Makes more sense than, every member of the bridge team going out in every away mission. Then we have the list of talents, what the requirements are, aspects of character development. So in this version of the game, so it's a little bit different in the Klingon, the book gives you another example, but you can have a milestone kind of development where you challenge a value or directive during the mission, you were injured by an attack, you use at least one value or directive positively or negatively. Basically, they will kind of allow you to change your values. You can choose 2 disciplines and reduce one by 1 and increase the other by 1. So you can kind of flop some expertise from one discipline to another. You can replace a focus. You can select a supporting character and use one of the above options for that supporting character as well if you want. You can also save up a milestone and use it later. And then give some recommendations on when to sort of spotlight characters and use these kind of milestones. So that's when a single main character is particularly prominent and significant during an adventure. They may get a single spotlight milestone to spend to do any number of things. An arc milestone is the culmination of a story arc, basically. So then that grants all the benefits of a spotlight milestone, which also grants the benefits of a normal milestone and allows you to select an option from the following list. So you can increase an attribute by 1, but never above 12. Choose a discipline, increase it by 1, but never above 5. Select an additional threat, talent, focus, or value, or select a supporting character and use the options for them. So you could have your best right-hand man in engineering, for example, could improve as well. And then we have a sort of rank and reputation table. So based on your rank, you'll have different levels of reputation as an officer. Main characters have a reputation score, which is kind of a gauge of how much they are regarded by their peers. And a main character begins with a reputation of 10, but you can gain or lose that as you go through player decisions. So If you act in accordance with Starfleet directives, that's positive on your reputation. If you challenge a directive, that could be negative. If you prevented combat, people getting killed, that's positive. If people that you're commanding get killed, then you'll get negative, and it's 1 per character killed. So if you really screw something up and get ship blown up, then yeah, that's going to be bad. So lots of, things that you would expect from the show, basically. If your reputation gets really bad, basically, then if your reputation goes high, you get promoted. But if it goes down really far, you might end up being set up for a court-martial, which could be very bad indeed. And here we have nice diagrams of the TOS era communicators and tricorders, which I think is pretty cool. Now we get into more of the background of the Star Trek Adventures universe. So different kinds of environments you'll encounter on Strange New Worlds. You can have hazardous environments, hostile, deadly environments, each of them having different effects for you. It gives examples of each, of course. It talks about the different classes of worlds. So these are kind of relatively small, airless moons, asteroids, etc. It gives you a nice diagram of the different types of worlds, including anomalous ones. The Class M is basically Earth-like. Class K is frozen. Class J is, gas giant, basically. So I'm going to give you a summary of each of those and the dangers that you can find in each of them. Now we have some alien encounters information. So you might encounter a horrible creature. Look at that thing. Terrifying. It's supposed to eat that whole shuttle. They might be aggressive creatures that are huge. They could be large groups of smaller creatures. They could be parasites. They might be creatures that live in space. So big, giant spacefaring things like crystalline entity type stuff. And then you have stellar phenomena you need to deal with. So this could be things like basically the various dangers of existing in space, essentially. So nebula, which can mess with your systems and reduce visibility. You can have solar flares, radiation storms, geomagnetic storms, ion storms, supernovas, neutron stars, black holes, pulsars, gravitational distortions, and exotic events, which could be micro black holes or all kinds of weird stuff that they mention there. Then we talk about basically a section to help both players and game masters dealing with research and development, developing technology, and coming up with new ideas when you're facing an unknown phenomenon. We have a nice sidebar about warp core maintenance, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and then we get into conflict. So in this game, you can have social conflict as well as physical conflict. So social conflict deals with like diplomatic incidents, basically. So if you're requesting something then that the other side doesn't want, for example, you might have to roll an opposed task to resolve that, which would be a kind of social combat. Deception as well will require rolls, and if deception is discovered, that could cause severe damage to what you're trying to do diplomatically, of course. If you have evidence to provide for your claims, you can reduce the difficulty of convincing your opponents of the facts. You could use intimidation, but pretty good for Klingons. Negotiation is another way, of course, to try and achieve what you want. And you can also use social conflict in combat. So you can try to convince the other parties in a combat that you don't need to be doing this. You can convey a threat, or you can pretend there's a threat, or you can try and use them to appeal to their better side, their better reason, all kinds of stuff. So combat is using a fairly abstract system of zones. So you have kind of the state of reach, where basically within arm's length of you. Close range is basically the zone where your character is in at a given time. It's basically near enough that you can affect each other directly. Medium range is the zone adjacent to your current zone, which is the close range. Long range is 2 zones away, and extreme range is 3 or more zones. So that comes into effect when you're talking about combat, but also distance and perception and movement. And that could be the distance you can move, the number of zones you can move, could be affected by things like different kinds of terrain, but also damage or injury, stuff like that. And as an example, they talk about falling here. So you could suffer some kind of injury for that. And now we have examples of combat tasks you can do. So there are minor actions, which is like aiming. That allows you to re-roll a single d20 made on an attack before the start of your next turn. You can draw a weapon, you can drop to the ground, you can interact with something, you can move to anything up to medium range, unless you have a talent or something that says otherwise. You can prepare a task, so that'll give you a little bit of a bonus when you need to do something. Or if you're prone, you can stand as a minor action. But you can't go down and up in the same turn, because that's just weird. You can also attempt a single task during each turn. So, and of course, when you're doing that, you could spend determination, you could use momentum, and determination can actually give you a second task, by the way, don't forget. You can also use some leadership abilities if you have them, and you can assist somebody else. So if you're giving aid, you declare which attribute, discipline, and focus they're assisting with, and then you would do the assistance to the action chosen for the other character. You can attack using any weapon you have to hand to try and inflict harm. You can create an advantage, using a base difficulty of 2. So you're trying to change the environment in some way to give you a bonus. You can direct somebody who's under your control to do a certain thing. And basically, if the character nominated for that may immediately attempt a single task, which is then assisted by you. You can guard, so just hold a defensive stance, and it's a base difficulty of 0 and increases the difficulty of attacks against you by 1. You can choose to pass and act later in the round, so kind of just wait and see what happens. You can ready yourself. Basically, you're kind of holding your action until a certain trigger occurs. You can recover, which is try and sort of regain your breath, clear your mind. So you gain 1 additional resistance for each effect rolled on your cover dice, and regain your ability to avoid injury. You can sprint to move to any point in medium range and move 1 additional zone per momentum spent. You can attempt first aid, which is a daring plus medicine task with a difficulty of 1 that can stabilize somebody so they won't die, but they remain incapacitated. There's loads of other stuff. You might try to disable equipment or turn off engines or whatever, and then the game master will adjudicate how those will work as per normal. Then there's the various steps of declaring an attack. So for a melee attack, you do daring plus security with difficulty of 1, and it's opposed by the target's daring and security, also a difficulty of 1. So if you are hit by an attack, then you can become injured, and that can come into play as well from falling, being set on fire, being exposed to an environmental hazard or something like that. Attacks have a damage rating, which is the number of challenge dice that you roll. Then you apply the total to the character in question. And if you overwhelm their maximum stress, then they also have a resistance as well. So resistance reduces the total of the incoming damage, so they can shrug off certain kinds of attack. And that represents their innate strength, or if they're wearing protective gear or something. So there are various melee combat options as well. You can disengage, you can grapple, you can shove, or you can strike, which is straight up attack. All of these, again, have a little flow chart. And many characters, including all player characters, have the limited ability to defend off mortal wounds by diving aside, ducking into cover, or otherwise dodging out of the way. It always comes at a price, however. So if you suffer an injury, you have the option of avoiding it. The character suffers no effect from being injured and may continue to act as normal, but it does not remove any other effects from the attack. So you still lose stress, you may still have been knocked prone, etc. And if you have to spend 2 momentum, or you can add 2 to threat, or you can suffer a complication, which represents a minor injury or some other consequence, such as a bystander taking a hit, machinery getting damaged, or something like that. But you can only avoid an injury once per scene, no matter what, basically, during a typical scene. I think of loads of examples again. Then we talk about how injuries work and how healing works. We can talk about non-linear combat, which is a little bit unclear, honestly, the way they present it. But they're trying to present, how combat in Star Trek is often there's multiple things happening at the same time. So, maybe one of the characters in the scene is a Q and just immune to everything, and they just keep screwing around with stuff. So combat can be, not just... okay, we have a Klingon guard and a Jem'Hadar, and they fight each other. It could be lots of weird stuff happening at the same time. Then there's some summaries of how you can use your combat momentum. So bonus damage, you can try to disarm someone. So you knock away 1 weapon held by the target. You can take an extra minor action. You can keep the initiative. So pass the action order to another ally instead of the enemy. So instead of alternating back and forth. You can add penetration damage. So the damage inflicted by the current attack ignores 2 resistance for each momentum you spend for that. You can re-roll your damage if you want by spending 1 momentum. You can avoid injury, as we discussed before. You can pick a secondary target, which is affected by the attack as well, and suffers half the damage rounded down. Or you could do a swift task for 2 momentum, so you can get 1 additional task, increasing the difficulty by 1 over what it would normally be. Then we talk about the types of attack. So damage effects can be of a few different types. You can have an area effect, which affects several targets. It can be intense. So basically the cost to avoid an injury by an intense weapon increases by 1 for each effect rolled on the die. If the weapon has knockdown, then if you roll 1 or more effect, the target is knocked prone. You can resist by adding to threat equal to the number of effect dice rolled. Piercing X, so that means the attack ignores X points of resistance. Vicious X means it inflicts X additional damage for each effect rolled. Then you can have qualities, which affect the way the weapons function. So if it's accurate, then if you use the aim minor action, then any number of d20s can be re-rolled when you shoot instead of the normal benefits of aiming, which is 1 d20. If it has the charge quality, then it needs to be, it can be scaled to different levels. So you can add a preparation minor action before attacking, and then add one of the following damage effects to the attack: area, intense, piercing 2, or vicious 1. Cumbersome, so this is a weapon that takes patience and precision to use effectively. You have to use a preparation minor action before attacking with it, basically. If the weapon is deadly, then it's harder to make a non-lethal attack because the weapon is designed to kill. It's not designed to injure or knock out. Debilitating weapons, so that makes first aid on characters injured by the weapon increase in difficulty by 1. A grenade is an explosive device, cannot be used at long or extreme range, and you can make up to 3 attacks with it during a scene. You can have hidden X, so basically when the weapon is hidden, any search of the character requires an insight plus security or reason plus security task with a difficulty of X to locate the weapon. That's pretty cool. The weapon could be imprecise, so then you get to gain no benefit at all from the aim minor action. And it could be non-lethal, so the weapon tries to knock people out. Then the difficulty of the attack increases by 1 if you want to make it a damaging attack. Then there's a sidebar here about improvised attacks. Then we get into tech and equipment alongside a lovely diagram of the USS Defiant. So the great thing about this game is that basically acquiring items is really easy because, it's the future. You're on a giant starship or starbase and you have replicators. So you can get whatever you want, basically. You might need to spend momentum to obtain an item. Basically, there's like an opportunity cost if you want to get something very quickly. The situation is time sensitive. If an item has an opportunity cost specifically, it'll be listed as opportunity X, where X is the amount of momentum that you must spend to obtain it. Some items have an additional or different cost, which is escalation. So that means that if I take a big-ass phaser rifle, then that's a very dangerous and lethal weapon compared to a hand phaser even. So that'll add to threat automatically by potentially escalating a situation. So some weapons can add to escalation multiple times. So it could have any potential value. Characters have a carrying capacity as well. You can get multiple items at the same time. You can also find unusual equipment, which could be found by, through a task, through exploration, or even a extended task. You can innovate and develop and design new stuff. You can build prototypes of stuff, and then you can have there's some talk here about different generations of technology. So unprecedented technology would be like the mobile hollow emitter used by the Voyager's Doctor, which was derived from 29th century technology. You could have later generation tech that you find from future versions of Starfleet. You could have unfamiliar designs, so it's basically doing something but in a different way. You can also have less advanced technology, so pre-warp tech, primitive tech like spears or whatever, or last generation tech, so you're in TNG but you're flying an old Constitution or something like that. I do love this 2-page spread. We've got a starbase, we've got, I think that's a steam runner, or no, not a steam runner. Is that an Akira class maybe? And that's a Galaxy class for sure. And then we have an Intrepid over there docked as well. Pretty cool. So then we get into a big list of gear, which I won't go into detail on. All the things you would expect are in there. Different kinds of phasers, type 1, 2, and 3. You've got disruptor pistols. You've got batleths, as you can see. You've got diagrams to explain what different types are. You've got armor and gear. And portable items for various tasks. You've got medical devices like tricorders, hypo sprays, standard medkit stuff. You have cybernetics. You can have anti-gravity equipment, communicators, transponder beacons, all that stuff. Now we get into stats for starships. And this is a pretty deep topic, which again, there are better resources than me to talk about that, but we'll just flick through and see what's included here. Basically, the ship is treated kind of like another character, which is, again, part of the inspiration of this game, of treating it like an episode simulator rather than a physics simulation. So the starship stats are surprisingly simple, and they're very similar to character stats, and they can actually assist you, particularly like if you're a medical officer and you have a sick bay, then you'll gain an assist from the ship when you're trying to heal somebody, stuff like that. So they talk a little bit in this chapter here about, what warp factors are used in the TNG period, how fast that relates to in terms of kilometers per hour, which is pretty absurd numbers. There's a little bit about star bases, the kind of assignments you would get, a little bit about colonies, and then we have the starship rules. So any action taken aboard a starship, it always benefits from the ship's presence and nature, because the ship is how the actions are taken. So basically moving around on the ship, firing torpedoes, scanning, and other actions are performed with the ship systems. So you get an assist from that. Starships typically have several traits which define what it is and what it's for. So just like characters again, they have different systems. So they have communications, computers, engines, sensors, structure, and weapons. So have a rating from 1 to 12. So similar to the attributes of a character. It talks about what each of those means. And then it has 6 departments. So we have command, con, engineering, security, science, and medicine. And it goes again through how the character can use the ship's command rating with different things, for example, to accomplish certain tasks. Same with con, engineering, etc. Starships do not have distinct focuses, but instead treat every task it attempts or assists as if it had an applicable focus. As a result, any d20 rolled on behalf of the ship, which rolls equal to or less than the ship's department, scores 2 successes, which is great. So when you're on board your ship, you really have a lot of help from the starship. Starships can also have talents, as characters do, and they come in different scales. You remember that's important, because if the GM wants to spawn a ship in the middle of a battle with threat, that will be a one threat per scale. So the biggest is Borg Sphere at scale 7. Galaxy-class starship or the Deridex-class warbird is class 6, for example. The original class Constitution is a 4. Shuttles and fighters are 1. Runabout is 2. So it's all pretty sensible. Starships also have resistance. They also have shields, which are normally equal to its structure plus security, but other factors can modify this. Starships don't suffer injuries in the way that characters do. Vessels generate power. So power can be lost because of complications, damage, and environmental stuff. But power is basically how starships are operated and how they perform actions. Then we get into starship combat, which again is quite difficult to explain, and it's better found elsewhere. But it's actually not too dissimilar from character combat in certain ways, and it's rather abstract. It's not like Starfleet battles or anything like that, but depending on your area of expertise on the ship, you'll have different possible actions you can take to assist in combat. So there are comms actions, security actions, damage reports, all that kind of stuff. And there's when you take a hit from an attack, then you will roll a d20 to see which system is hit. And you can take damage as well. There can be cover sometimes in space, but that can be pretty hard to find, and space is mostly empty after all. You can take damage to communications. You can take damage to computers. So basically, if the ship is reduced by 0 shields by an attack, it suffers a breach. Or if it suffers 5 or more damage from a single attack or hazard after resistance, it suffers a breach. Or if the ship had 0 shields before the attack, and the attack inflicts any amount of damage, then you suffer a breach. So depending on the scale of the ship is how many breaches it takes to damage, disable, and destroy a given system. And what happens in each of those cases is described under each section of the starship. So, if they've been damaged or disabled or destroyed, then it tells you what happens when that section of the ship is blown up. And of course, you can have warp core breaches happen. There are different ways to try and stabilize or eject the reactor. You can call for abandoning ship when things get real bad. NPC vessels can use the full damage rules, but it can be difficult for the GM if there's a lot of ships in the battle, so they give you some ways to kind of chill that out a little bit. Then we talk about starship weapons. You have 2 basic types, energy or torpedoes. They typically have area effect dampening, which means they remove power for each effect that they roll, so they suck power out of the ship. Persistence means they leave behind a lingering additional damage for a number of rounds equal to the number of effects that you roll. You can have piercing, you can have spread, so you can, if you roll 1 or more effects, the attack inflicts additional hit to a random system, even if you are targeting a specific system. Or it could be vicious, which is, again, X additional damage for effects. It have qualities of calibration, so you need to prepare minor action before you fire. You usually get this for stuff like torpedoes. Devastating means that engineering tasks to repair damage caused by this weapon increase the difficulty by 1. Again, that's usually torpedoes or other explosive weapons. Hidden X means that they're concealed from scans, and the difficulty to find them by scan is increased to X, or increased in difficulty by X, rather. High yield weapons, so they inflict massive damage. If the attack inflicts 1 or more breaches, it inflicts an additional breach. And finally, Versatile X, it gains X points of bonus momentum if it's successful. And then there are ways you can spend momentum during starship combat as well to gain, devastating attacks, swift attacks, removing points of the target power, etc. Then we talk about some procedure stuff like landing shuttles, runabouts, and we have some stats here for basic shuttlecraft, shuttle pods, and the Danube class runabout, which is more treated like a full ship. It has Phaser bank, micro torpedoes, and tractor beam. It has customizable modules as well. So now we have the basic ships. So typically what you'll do is you'll get a space frame, and that's the baseline for the starship. And then you can add refits, you can change it up for the mission profile, etc. So we have the Akira class. Oh yeah, I was right about that one being the Akira class. We have the Constellation class, which has the distinctive 4 nacelles. Used to be the USS Stargazer was the Constellation class, captained by Picard. We have the classic Constitution class, which again is the TOS era. You'll notice the numbers are not quite as high as they are for TNG era ships. We have the classic Defiant, the warship prototype from DS9. We've got the Defiance. We've got the Excelsior class, which you can see up here. And yeah, each of these, of course, you can see has a varying set of attacks, scale, system department scores, and various talents. We have the Galaxy class. Still my favorite, even though it looks kind of goofy with the huge nacelle compared to some of the others. It's not super elegant, but great features as well. So, photons, strong tractor beams, really good structure and weapons, and it can have social separation, redundant systems, and modular laboratories. So they're quite big and flexible. We have the Intrepid class, which is the Voyager class. We have the Miranda, which is very adaptable, basically. So they have extensive shuttle bays as well. I don't know if they reflect in this one or in a later supplement about how they can have different pods for different kinds of attacks and stuff. We have the Nova class, which was introduced later in Voyager. Lovely little ship. Then we have the different mission profiles. So basically, the players choose a mission profile for their starship. These provide the ship's departments, which are added to those already granted by the class, and a single talent from a short list. So you'll get additional talent, and you'll add to your departments according to what the mission profile is, which could be strategic and diplomatic, pathfinder or reconnaissance, technical testbed, tactical ops, scientific and survey ops, crisis and emergency response, multi-world explorer. And then you can also have refits as well. So every 10 years or so, you can increase the power of your ship to a refit. So you'll increase a single system by 1, but never above 12. And you can add to these different systems in various ways. Then you put it all together, and you have your final starship. And then we get into how the different types of energy weapons work. So we have phasers, disruptors, and polaron beams, which they have piercing 2 because they're good at getting through shields. Disruptors have vicious 1. And phasers have versatile 2 because they're adaptable. Phasers can be delivered by cannons, banks, or arrays. And then we have torpedoes. So these can have photon, quantum, or plasma torpedoes. Plasma torpedoes were used by the Romulans, and they have a persistent damage quality. Quantum torpedoes have a base damage of 4, vicious 1 with calibration and high yield. Photon torpedoes have base damage of 3 with high yield, so they don't need calibration. And then there's a list of all the starship talents you can have. So they really are a lot like a character, just with some differences as far as how they're put together. Then we have alien vessels that you might encounter. So the Klingons, of course, who are allies and get their own core rulebook later in the line. We have the Romulan Star Empire. They have the special rules for cloaking devices, which have a sidebar. It's somewhere. What does it say? Sidebar on page 259. Okay, anyway. They use disruptors and plasma torpedoes. The early bird of prey had a prototype cloaking device. Then the massive Diderodex class warbird is really not one you want to run up against too often. It's got a standard cloaking device and very powerful plasma torpedoes, so watch out for that. Then we have the Cardassian ships. Warships is the Gaylor class. They have disruptor banks, phaser arrays, and tractor beams. Then we have the Jem'Hadar attack ships from the Dominion, polaron beams, photon torpedoes, and disruptors. They also have anti-cloak sensors and advanced transporters. The battle cruisers, they have phased polaron beam arrays. And then we get a Borg collective, Borg sphere as well. So they have a cutting beam, which has a close range, but does absolutely horrible damage, 10 dice plus vicious 1. They can drain your energy with 10 dice dampening, and they have a strong tractor beam. They also have advanced transporters, regenerative systems, and threat protocols. The Borg Cube has structure 15. It's just insane. Lots of power, lots of shields, 13 resistance, so it's almost impossible to damage it, basically. They have adaptive subspace fields, so they adapt to your weapons. They're colossal, so inflicting damage on them is extraordinarily difficult, of course. They also have regenerative systems and advanced transporters and threat protocols. Then we have the Datora class Marauder, which is a typical Ferengi ship. They're actually reasonably well armed. They have electromagnetic pulse. So if you just want to like pump out an EMP and do a lot of dampening damage and just run away, that's a possibility. They also have phaser banks and photons and a decent tractor beam. We have Maquis Raiders, tend to be smaller ships. They have rugged design, which is helpful to get out of battles intact, but not super strong. And we have an example here as well of a Maquis Fighter, so the other tiny little guys here. Then we have the GM section, which is super helpful. Give you some more tips about sort of the different types of games you can play in the Star Trek universe, how to set them in earlier periods, the 22nd, 23rd centuries, dealing with character creation, making sure that characters are kind of understand what their concept is and how to help that along, managing the rules, which is really helpful, dealing with traits, complications, advantages, etc., values and directives, just clearing up for the other side of the screen, basically, what you need to do. And this section on threats is particularly useful. A lot of GMs forget to spend their threat, but you should be using it all the time, basically. Just make every scene kind of go extreme. And, that gives your characters chances to be heroic and to build momentum and use it against you. So it's the kind of constant back and forth of each side having narrative influence on the story, setting out new challenges for the other. And it's really what makes this game sing, I think. So make sure you use your threat, people. Then it's how to deal with player characters, and particularly if somebody's in a command role, that can be difficult. So one thing some groups do is they'll have the captain is like an NPC, and they'll make the decisions based on the group's sort of collective decisions. Then it talks about more standard roles like cons, so you're the helmsman, basically being in security operations, engineering, sciences, and then some handy tables for rolling up NPCs. Minor NPCs are just like ordinary soldiers or whatever, but then notable NPCs and major NPCs are kind of fully developed characters. It also gives you some tips on role-playing as alien NPCs, so that can be difficult to get across. But you can at least get across the basics of, manipulative Romulan, a quick-to-anger Klingon, or a very logical Vulcan, for example. Then using threat as momentum to use your NPCs as good opposition. Dealing with NPC starship damage. Dealing with experience, again, so more detail about the milestone system. When to let players go for promotion. How to deal with reputation fairly. And to deal with the possibility of disciplinary action, like being in the brig, being demoted, or even court-martialed. And then some hot tips on creating encounters, which is useful. It's useful to have like starship plans and stuff, but because you're dealing with zones, I think it would work quite well. Theater of the mind, the same as Star Wars FFG, which I play a lot, has very crunchy rules for combat, but it works in range bands, and we just do it Theater of the Mind, and it works just fine. There is a set of miniatures rules as well for Star Trek Adventures called Red Alert, so you can use that as well. Then there's some tips here for creating minor NPCs really quickly, creating notable NPCs quickly, creating major NPCs quickly, creating NPC talents or special rules for them, generating planets, and there's some random tables for what you might find in a particular system. Really handy stuff for an exploration-based campaign. And then we have some stat blocks, basically. So it categorizes each NPC by type. So we have some, minor NPCs like standard Starfleet officers that you might use on the ship. The Maquis could be also posing as one of these people. Section 31 operatives would be notable because Section 31 is like super deep cover intelligence stuff. They have a sample captain, major NPC, a sample admiral as a major NPC. Then we get some Klingons ranging from minor to a veteran warrior who's notable, to Mokvar, son of Koloth, a major NPC, and he's got loads of cool stuff that he can do. And then we have adversaries like the Romulans. So our standard Romulan Ulan is a minor NPC, so they're the lowest ranking officer in the Romulan Guard. Then we have the Romulan Centurions, the mid-ranking officers. They're notable NPCs. And then we have a Tal Shiar agent as an example of a major Romulan NPC. Then we even have some Borg. We got tactical drones as minor NPCs, but they do have a lot of special rules like adaptive shielding, assimilation, immune to fear, immune to pain, machine 3, night vision, and threat protocols. So still very scary. Then we have technical drones as a minor NPC. They have even more stuff. Borg medical drones. And then Borg characters. So this could be Borgs that have been sort of unassimilated, I suppose. Then we have some characters from the Ferengi Alliance. So these are rank and file officers found on Ferengi starships as minor NPCs. Salesman, like Quark or somebody, could be a notable NPC. A major NPC would be somebody of a high military, mercantile, or political rank. It allows for command of a starship and the conducting of trade relations. Then we got the Cardassians, ranging from minor Cardassian soldiers to Cardassian Glynn, which is a high-ranking officer. And an example of major NPC is Gul Tramak. Gul is the commanding officer of a starship or installation. So we met a few Gulls during the DS9, of course. Then we have the Dominion, the Jem'Hadar warriors, which are created exclusively for combat. They're minor NPCs, but they are really strong, so be careful. Jem'Hadar first. So they're the commanders of each unit of Jem'Hadar. They're a notable NPC. And the Vorta Overseer would be a genetically engineered race created by the founders, and they're responsible for the running of the Dominion, basically. So they're much more important in the overall structure of the Dominion than the typical Jem'Hadar. There's some hot tips on running Dominion characters as well. Then we get into some alien artifacts. Cool stuff like duplicators for androids, Iconian gateways, mind swap devices, alien artifacts like the amusement park planet, Darcy Archive, Dyson Spheres, Gom2 the Living Starship, which was from an early season of TNG, I think. The Planet Killer, which is on TOS, I think. Yeah, way back in the original series. And then some random beasts of the galaxy. Targs are typically kept as pets for Klingons. We've got Silat, so they're large bear-like creatures from the planet Vulcan. Got Mugatos, white-furred carnivorous ape, quite dangerous. See them in lower decks as well. Solarian hook spiders, they're really disgusting, so let's not think about them too much. Berengarian dragons, they're major NPCs, and they are massive, apparently. That's their special rules. It takes 8 stress to inflict an injury instead of 5. We have the Denavian neural parasite, so they are generally part of a group of such creatures traveling through space. And they like to attach to people and become fused with your nervous system and control you. So that's not very nice. We have Nova Diggers. We have Gunji Jackdaws, a large flightless bird from Gunji. We have a Palaku, native to the moons of Bajor, an oversized spider. So they're docile and provide ample nutrition for the resistance movement. Gross. I don't want to eat giant spider. Crystalline Entity. There we go. Major NPC. So they are kind of a starship scale. And there are starship scale threats in this game, of course. That's an example. And then we have the Rescued Xerxes 4, which is the starting adventure, which I'm going to entirely skip for you. And of course, then we have a blank character sheet at the back. We have some more cool diagrams of ships. We have a Starship Registry entry and a recommendation to buy the Borg Cube box, which I don't think they sell anymore. And then the other part of the Star Map continued from the beginning end papers, and that is a full 95 minutes on the Star Trek Adventures Core Rulebook. I really wanted to go faster than that, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in this game, but you can see that, you know, with the addition of the life path generation system, focuses, and the treatment of starships in this game as kind of additional characters, it really brings across that starship feel. And there is a lot more crunch in this game than there would be in something like John Carter of Mars, but it's not overbearing by any means, and it's still much less than something like D&D. Before we go, I will just quickly show you the Game Master screen pack that you get, which is really cool for several reasons. One is that you get these wonderful reference sheets which you can pass out to your players. So you have a commanding officer reference, and a rule summary is on the other side of all of these as well. So you can give this to your helmsman, give this one to your sensors and comms person, you can give one to your tactical person. You've got comms and internal systems, and then a conflict reference. So whenever you get to a fight, everybody has that to refer to as well. And then a summary of conflict momentum spends. These are really nice, high-quality card references, well worth having. And then along with the screen, you get this lovely double-sided poster. One is the same space battle scene that's on the screen itself, but expanded. And the other is a massive galaxy map, which is, again, super useful to have. Loads and loads of key locations are marked out on there. And then you have the screen itself. Unfortunately, the screen for the standard game is a little bit of a non-standard shape. It's this big square kind of monstrosity. It's a little bit odd. It makes it harder to store and obviously hits the camera. Sorry about that. But it's really high quality in terms of the material. It's got everything you need as a GM in terms of judging difficulty, remembering how to do opposed tasks, complication ranges, uses of determination, momentum, all kinds of ways to spend momentum during different circumstances, common tasks in conflict, a summary of the attack rules, a summary table for typical weapons, and the NPC special abilities that you might be able to give them. So really great stuff. The art as well on the back is really nice. You can see there's a big battle going on here between, we got what looks like a Nova class, a Galaxy class, and an Akira class on the Fed side, firing all their stuff over at a couple of, a triplet, in fact, of Romulan warbirds who are firing back with disruptors and plasma torpedoes. So it's going to get messy in a minute. But it's a really nice set when you factor in the fact that the screen, again, is really high quality, and these reference sheets and poster are just beautifully made and super handy. If you're going to play around a physical table, strongly recommend this as well. So with that, we've covered both the core rulebook and the GM's kit for Star Trek Adventures. Next time, we'll look at the Klingon core rulebook and the GM's kit for that, which of course is different because there's some differences there with the Klingons. I hope that was useful, informative, and entertaining enough for the huge amount of time I spent on this. But if you love Star Trek at all, buy the damn game. It's great. Start with the tricorder set. If you're really brand new to this kind of stuff. Otherwise, get yourself a couple sets of dice, buy the core rulebook and GM's kit, and just go ham. You'll have a great time. So with that, I'm done for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and are keeping yourselves safe and well as usual. I look forward to seeing you in my next video, which will hopefully be on the Klingon Empire Core Rulebook. And so I look forward to seeing you then. All right, take care and bye-bye.